hear you're looking for restricted Pathfinder content. Come, step into me office. It's a bathroom.
There is specific content in Pathfinder 2e that you cannot just pick up and put on your character sheet. No, technically, rules as written, there is tons of content in this game that you are not allowed to use. Unless you are. I'm here to put a big rumor, misconception, something to rest, because the restricted content of Pathfinder 2e is too cool not to have being used at your table. That was an English sentence. Howdy. My name is Nonat, and today we are talking about the restricted content of Pathfinder 2e. Now, if you've only used the core rulebooks of Player Core 1 and Player Core 2, chances are you might not know what I'm talking about, because not much of that content is restricted. Most of the restricted content in this game is from the expanded books, mostly the Lost Omens line. Now, why is that? Well, before I get into that, I want to explain what I mean by restricted. You see, there are two traits that can hold back content from being used by any character, and these are the uncommon and rare traits. If a feat or a magic item or a spell or even a class feat has either of these traits attached to it, you cannot just pick it and put it on your character, at least not rules as written. Remember that, we'll get back to that later. So what do these two traits mean? Obviously, uncommon and rare have their own meanings. If you've ever played Hearthstone, you know what they mean. But these actually have tangible meanings in the system. You see, uncommon means it does exist readily in the world, whatever this thing is. However, it is usually only specific to a certain kind of culture or a certain breed of person, you know, a certain sub-ancestry. What's it called? Heritage. That's the word. I've played this game for 5 years. Or it's just uncommon enough that it's only found in certain parts of the world. That's why this uncommon trait is so common in the Lost Omens line of books. If you're unaware, the Lost Omens books are all supplementary expansions to Pathfinder, specifically about different parts of the world. Tian Sha, the Mwangi Expanse, High Helm, whatever. The reason so many of the options in that book are uncommon is because they are native to the regions those books are about. And most things with the uncommon trait will also be found with the access trait. Now, what is access? Well, it's exactly what it says on the tin. In order to use this uncommon whatever, you need to fulfill the access. Think of this as a prerequisite, but put a little asterisk on that because it's almost like an optional prerequisite. Let's look at something from the brand new book Shining Kingdoms, because this is loaded with uncommon options that I think are super cool. And it's sort of the reason I made this video. Let's look at the Black Jacket Dedication. I'm not going to go over what it does in this video. I'll be uploading that on Monday. But you'll see right away it is uncommon with an access of you are from Druma. Now, a common misconception about this is that only characters from Druma can use the Black Jacket archetype. A lot of tables play this way. I think the Pathfinder Society does play this way. And if you are playing in an official Pathfinder Society game, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I have not touched much Pathfinder Society. I've been very outside and orbiting around it over the years, but I'm not super involved myself. I believe you need to be from Druma to use this archetype. Now let's talk about that little asterisk I put, making this an optional prerequisite. Access is not denying anyone else from taking this archetype. What it is doing is saying if you fulfill this access requirement of being from Druma, you don't need special permission. If you're an elf fighter from the Mwangi Expanse and you want to take the Black Jacket Dedication, well, there's one of two options. Your GM either says, yeah, that's totally fine, the abilities line up with your character, you can just take it, or your character will have to find training from someone, likely from Druma in universe, to teach you how to be a Black Jacket. However, if your character is from Druma fulfilling that access, then when you hit level 2, obviously you should still clear it with your GM because that's just being a courteous player, but rules as written, they can't say no. I don't like talking about this also because any GM does have the right to say no, and every player, even if you're picking a common option, should tell your GM, you should talk about what you're taking, not only so that the GM isn't super surprised, but also so they can tailor cool encounters to your abilities. That's a whole other video. But that's all access means. If you fulfill it, you do not need special permission or training. Most uncommon options in Pathfinder will come with an access that gives you permission to use them. However, some just don't. Some things are just uncommon because they are uncommon, and that's totally fair. If you are going to have them on your character, you will need to ask your GM for permission and make sure it makes sense in the lore of the world. And let me dismiss a common misconception. No, the uncommon trait does not mean that the option is more powerful than a common trait. Uncommon, and by extension rare, have no indication of power level, with one exception. But I'll get to that when we're talking about the rare trait. The last thing I want to mention is uncommon creatures. This actually does have a mechanical effect because an uncommon creature is much less publicly known, and as such, the chance that your character knows anything about it is less. So an uncommon creature's DC to recall knowledge about it is inherently increased by 2. This is actually something I've never paid much attention to as a GM, but it makes sense. You know, if you're fighting this really obscure sub-breed of troll, just as a random example, then yeah, people probably don't know as much about it because it's not a normal troll. It's not common. It's not universal. It's not a normal troll. It's a troll that is specifically from, I don't know, the land of the Linorm Kings. And as such, it's just harder to recall knowledge on it. And I think that's a really cool mechanical feature of the trait. Now, let's talk about the rare trait. It functions pretty much identically to the uncommon trait, except it doesn't even usually come with an access requirement. If you are going to use something with the rare trait, you need GM permission, because this is something that is like, it's not totally unique, it's not the one of its kind, but it is very few and far between, the most obvious recent example of a rare character option being the Exemplar class. The Exemplar itself is literally a mortal that has been blessed with a spark of divinity inside of them. You have like 2 inches of God inside of you. That's a weird way to word it. To quote the book directly, a rare feat, spell, item, or the like is available to players only if the GM decides to include it in the game. They also add typically discovery during play. That's a really interesting thing to add on there, is that most of the time you can't just take a rare option at level 1, unless you're an Exemplar, I guess. Rare creatures are also similar to uncommon creatures, except because they are even less common than uncommon, the DC to recall knowledge on them is increased by 5 instead of just 2. Now, let's talk about that thing I said we'd talk about after I talked about it. Rare is not a secret way for Paizo to say, this is stronger content. We just wanted to post stronger content because it's fun, and we gave it the rare trait to make it okay that it's stronger. No, that's not what the rare trait is for. And if you're an aspiring homebrewer writing your own content, hold yourself to the same standard. You can't just make something stronger than the baseline of the game and give it the rare trait and call that okay. I'm looking at you, D&D 3.5 homebrew. However, Paizo themselves hasn't exactly stuck to this same rule. Obviously, it's not a written rule. It's not written anywhere that, oh, rare doesn't mean stronger. But sometimes it does mean stronger. And I, as a consumer and a player of this game and a GM, don't like when that happens. With the biggest example of this being the Exemplar. The Exemplar as a class is incredibly strong. It has some of the best action economy. It has some of the best multiple attack manipulation. It has some of the best survivability. It is incredible. It is just as accurate as your Barbarian or your Ranger. It's not as accurate as a Fighter, sure, but those icons, which I'll get to when I make my Exemplar class guide, look forward to that sooner rather than later, are insane. Especially just rules as written. I'm gonna move on, but the TLDR is that the Exemplar, it's not game-breakingly overpowered, but a lot of tables do agree that you need to finagle how they work to make them balanced. The last thing I want to touch on, just as a little bonus to all this restricted content, is unique content. In fact, unique, I believe, is only on creatures and magic items, and it's exactly what it sounds like. They are one of a kind. There is nothing else like them, and because of it, the DC to recall knowledge a unique creature is 10 higher. So even a level 1 unique creature, which would be like a DC 14 recall knowledge, is instead going to be a DC 24, and I think that's hilarious. And there you go, that's your guide on how to use restricted content in Pathfinder 2e. It can be really confusing, especially for new players, people who are still in their first campaign of PF2 who suddenly see uncommon and rare and either don't know how to handle it or just ignore it. I've actually seen that pop up in a few of my campaigns, even with veteran players who will just throw on a rare feature, and usually, because we're a very chill group, the GM will just shrug and say, okay, that's fine. So talk to your GM. At the end of the day, talk to your table. Talk to your friends. These are people you want to spend 4 hours a week with. Just talk to them. The worst thing the GM can do is say no, and the best thing that could happen is they say yes, you get your thing that you wanted, and the GM isn't blindsided by some weird, obscure choice that you're trying to shoehorn into the story in a way that doesn't make sense. So that's all from me, and GMs, don't be afraid to say yes. The uncommon options are not overpowered, they are not too strong, they are not imbalanced. They're just restricted because Pathfinder is obsessed with its own lore, which it has every right to be, because the Pathfinder lore is incredible. If you've never picked up a Lost Omens book and read through the lore, you absolutely need to. I have not read the lore.